Warning, this content may be disturbing to some audiences. Subscribe, if you dare. I saw the man I made eye contact with that night and realized what I stopped and how I didn't take seriously someone who was capable of murder many times over. Hey everybody, welcome to ANECDOSED. People ask Reddit. People of Reddit who have interacted with or met a serial killer or had a close call. How was the exchange? What happened in years or weeks? Whatever. What was your reaction to seeing them on the news? Number 1. When I was 7, a man knocked on our door at about 8:30 at night. My mom and I were in the living room watching TV. My mom answered the door, and he said something about selling newspapers. She said she wasn't interested, and as she tried to close the door, he tried to force his way inside. She always had the chain latch on, and she kicked the door closed on his arm as he tried to grab for her. He ran away and she called the police. About a year later, Cleophas Prince Jr. was arrested for killing 6 women, mostly in our neighborhood. My mom recognized him as the man who tried to force his way in that night. Number 2. Commenter. My dad met Charlie Manson at a motorcycle shop, if I remember right, in Venice Beach in the 60s. Said he remembered a really short, my dad's a foot taller, creepy dude with scary eyes. Didn't think anything of it until he turned up on the news. Person B. My mom met him in Venice as well. She told me he was charming. She met him at a party briefly and was shocked when he was arrested. Number 3. Commenter. My grandmother was a neighbor to John Wayne Gacy for a brief time. My mother used to talk about a photo they had with him, completely unaware of what was going on. Of course, after his conviction they were floored. My grandmother said he was a nice man, it seemed. They have pictures of him in his driveway as well. Person B. My mom's side of the family is from Elmwood Park, about 15 minutes away from where Gacy committed all his murders. They all have stories about interacting with Gacy at some point or another. At some point, I was told that my uncle had a close encounter with him, though he didn't put the pieces together until years later. As I grew up, I found that most of my friends' parents also had their own personal stories about him. My friend's dad happened to be friends with Gacy's criminal defense attorney. They wrote a book about him together. Number 4. Commenter. I went to the same church as BTK. He was always very nice, polite, and helpful. I remember how shocked my family was when he was arrested. He had such a firm handshake. I've met so many people in the Park City area who've had a creepy encounter with him. My friend's aunt was one of the women who got away. She heard the window break in the living room and saw a hand reaching through to unlock the door. She ran away and then moved out of Kansas permanently. Person B. My uncle helped start that church. Most weeks his family had a Sunday dinner with the Raiders. He said he would have never known. I just remember him saying everyone was very worried about the kids. Person C. His son was one of my students when he was caught. Never met the man himself, but it was quite a shock to find that out when the suits came to speak to his son. Number 5. When I was 13, I was living on the streets of Lake Elsinore, California, and had a lady looking after me that was a druggie and a hooker. She had a John that really liked her and invited us to his place once. He was a real weird-ass bastard. A year later she turned up dead with a whole bunch of other working girls in the area killed by the I-15 strangler. When they caught the guy, I instantly recognized him as the John. His name was William Lester Suff, and the trailer that he took us to was his kill shack. Number 6. I have met 2 while sitting in jail in lockdown protected custody. One was a convicted axe murderer who was waiting on a retrial as the evidence and testimony against him was in question. He was a decent guy as long as you didn't piss him off by changing the channel when football was on or do anything stupid like singing or kicking the doors at night. He even cut my hair for me when we got the clippers. I remember he had Project Innocence lawyers, so he might not actually be one, who knows. His name was Sherwood Brown. The second one was just crazy. He threw all his discovery papers out of the beanhole of his cell, and they included pictures of his victims. He would try to sell dried deodorant from the state issue as drugs and was supposedly willing to tell people where he'd buried the bodies to snitch on him, but it sounded like a con and I avoided talking to him out on rec. From what I remember, he was sitting in jail for a murder in Mississippi and was just waiting on a transfer. I don't remember his name as I avoided talking to him. Number 7. Elizabeth Wetlaufer was my dad's nurse. She disappeared, saw her on the news about 3 months later, led away in handcuffs for killing several seniors over a period of years. Reaction: holy shit. Then checking dates of when she was still working, and my dad's date of death, about a month later. Exchanges with her never raised any red flags, Just typical visitor/nurse talk. Number 8. I dated a killer. He was not a killer at the time. We were young and met on a dating website. He went to my high school but graduated a few years before me. The first month was okay. Then he changed. We had a huge fight one time because he said something silly. I don't even remember what it was, but I playfully threw a pillow at him. He immediately flipped out, punched a hole in my door and told me he'd make it so I would never have anything to come back to. Another time, he finally got a job. Didn't have one when I met him, and I was paying for everything. After job searching for months, he got one. It's his first few days at his new job, and all of a sudden he doesn't want to go in. No reason, he just doesn't feel like it. I tell him he better get to that damn job or he's going to lose it. After a lot of arguing, he gets ready and we both get in the car so I can drive him to work. As I'm driving, it gets more heated and he starts strangling me while I'm at a red light. The red light was right next to a gas station and I pulled in there while his hands were around my throat. I managed to get him off me and I get out of the car and scream, "What the F? I'm sorry. I blacked out. You just pissed me off so much. I told you I didn't want to go to work." The relationship lasted less than a year. He cheated on me with some girl, and for the first and only time in my life, I was glad someone was cheating on me. You can go live with her and be someone else's problem now. Then years later when I saw him on the news, I felt really bad for that thought. He had handcuffed his then girlfriend, who had just had his baby, to the bed, and strangled her to death. He thought she had cheated on him. He then dismembered her body and lived with it for a month in their apartment. Eventually, the smell tipped some people off along with his GF not being seen by family in a bit. The baby was okay though and was taken in by the girl's family. He went on the run, but was later caught and is currently in prison. Number 9. I lived in a mirrored house, one my family, the other my aunt, for my first 10 years of life in Mexico. My aunt met a guy from the USA who somehow stayed for a year or two at her house. He was okay and my aunt fell in love with him, never really said that but we saw it. My father was always kind of suspicious of that guy but never had problems with him. After he left, he went to China and my aunt went there once to visit him. After that, we didn't really hear about him. My parents and brother left Mexico when I was 10 and came to Croatia. So after 7 years we found out that he became an English teacher in China, and one of his students casually looked on the FBI webpage for wanted people and saw her teacher. Apparently this guy, back when he was living in the USA, had a girlfriend who had a daughter, about 10 years old. He then started to help her with the daughter and sometimes drive her to school. He tried to sexually abuse her. Eventually the mother found out and wanted to report him, but he then killed her and her daughter, ran away and was a very wanted man. The student was shocked but immediately reported him. He was then arrested and it was over the news. The thought that that guy lived meters away from me for 2 years and could have done something to me or my family at any point haunts me. Number 10. I had a regular customer at my shop who would come in and buy cigarettes and beer after his shift. He was friendly and polite enough, helped us to catch a shoplifter on one occasion, however did like to stare a little too much at one of my colleagues. Then a young woman goes missing in my town. It was all over the news as it was completely out of character for her. There were ribbons scattered in trees and lampposts all over. One day they pulled a body out of the river and it was identified as this young woman. Her family was devastated. A few days later they announced the name of a man they wanted to speak to who had been spotted in a local shop buying cigarettes and beer and later on CCTV trying to talk to her in a park. However, he hung himself and was found dead in a local park a few days later. It was the customer. The shop footage they showed was from my shop. The cashier had been blurred so we have no way of knowing who served him that time, but it gives me the creeps just thinking about it. Number 11. I grew up next to a family whose eldest daughter dated the brother of Luke Ferguson, who was a murderer and a psychopath. He's since killed an inmate since being in jail for his original murder. There was a big empty lot on our street where everyone in the neighborhood would play baseball and we always hated it when Luke would come. Guy was such a dick, always whining and trying to bully everyone else. My buddy Patrick took 2 beaners from him one day when he was pitching and after the second one charged him with the baseball bat. Luke stopped coming around after that. Some years later we see him on the news sitting on a damn John Deere tractor being interviewed about his neighbor's murder, saying oh it's a horrible tragedy, only to find out 2 days later he was the one who did it. None of us were shocked. Patrick texted me that night and said I should have ran his fat ass down and launched his skull across the street. Number 12. I took a job in Wichita, KS from another state. While we were looking for a place to live, we stopped at a house for sale in Park City, which is a suburb of Wichita. As me and the missus got out to look at the house, the neighbor across the street was outside, so I walked over and asked him about the neighborhood. He seemed friendly enough. After talking for about 10 minutes, we got back in the car. My wife immediately said that guy was crazy in his eyes. We didn't buy that house, but a couple years later the BTK killer was apprehended, and it was effing Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, that we were talking to. We would have lived directly across the street from a serial killer. They have since bulldozed his house and it no longer exists. Number 13. I was in Baton Rouge during the early 2000s when Derek Todd Lee was active in the city. At the time, I was dating a girl who roughly fit the physical profile of the victims. She was house sitting for her aunt and uncle who lived in a mansion on the LSU lakes, and one evening calls me while driving back to their house from errands, and she is crying. "There's someone following me, a white pickup truck." At this point the suspect was believed to be driving exactly this. "I've started driving around in circles and it's still following me." I grabbed my roommate and we were out the door. He drove and made the 20-minute drive to her aunt's house in 8 minutes. When we were approaching the interstate exit, I called and told her to head to the house. She was freaking out. He was still behind her, but she got to the house and ran inside. A minute later we pulled up just as 2 houses down, on the opposite side of the street, a white pickup park. I run in and check on her and she confirms it is that truck that's been following her. Ask my roommate to get my back and head out there. Go give a rap to the hood of the truck and try my best to look/sound intimidating. I just stare the driver down and say, "You gotta get out of here, buddy. I don't know what you want, but you gotta get out of here." The driver nervously eyes me and drives off. I'm thinking, another stupid LSU student, a misunderstanding. She lost track of the car following her, and this is just some guy parking here just a few houses down from the famed submarine races parking spot on the lakes. I didn't see the guy again in person, but I recognized him when I saw him nearly a year later when the cops perp walked Derek Todd Lee, arresting him as the Baton Rouge serial killer. I saw the man I made eye contact with that night and realized what I stopped and how I didn't take seriously someone who was capable of murder many times over. Make sure to share your personal story in the comments below and have the opportunity to be featured in a future video. Also, if you like these topics, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to continue seeing more content like this every day. See you next time. Warning, this content may be disturbing to some audiences. Subscribe, if you dare. When I was little and we were on holiday, my dad used to get me to say I was younger than I was so we could get into theme parks cheaper. Hey everybody, welcome to AskReddit. People ask Reddit. Parents of Reddit, what is the most embarrassing thing your toddler said out loud in public? Number 1. My oldest daughter and I used to run away from my wife when we went shopping. One time, we got particularly far away and I asked her, "What do you want to do now that mom can't stop us?" She exclaimed loudly, "Near others, we can punch a stranger." Number 2. There is a man who lives in our village with no arms, Mr. M. His children attended my son's nursery, so he has met him many times. We were in a packed doctor's waiting room one day and Mr. M came in. "Son," at full volume, "look mummy. There's Mr. M that I told you about. He has no arms. Look. Look." Pointing. At this point the whole waiting room, in true British style, have turned their heads in the opposite direction to Mr. M, and are actively trying not to look while similarly avoiding eye contact with me, and the disrespectful small child who draws attention to people's disabilities. Me, "Ah yes, that is Mr. M. We see him at school, don't we?" "Son, yeah, he came in to talk to us one day." "Oh gosh, what is coming next? He drives his car with his feet. Please don't say more, he is totally awesome." Massive sigh of relief, "Yeah dude, he really is." Number 3. We were at the grocery store one time and my little brother saw a man with a prosthetic arm. He was so excited because "Mommy, sissy, look, he has a robot arm." The guy was totally cool about it and even let lil bro touch the robot arm, and they became buddies and waved at each other every time they passed each other in the store. Number 4. Commenter. My son came home from kindergarten with his backpack full of canned food. When pressed about the issue, he confidently stated that he had told the teacher he was hungry and we didn't have any food at home. They had sent him home with the donations for those in need. We got him to return the food the next day. It's a funny story we tell now, but talk about embarrassment. Person B. You are not alone on this one. My friend's son told his teachers they don't have a turkey for Thanksgiving, so they sent him home with a voucher for a turkey. His mom had to explain they were just serving ham and not needy. When my sister was little, she didn't understand the food drive concept. My mom sent her to school with canned soup to donate, and she came home with Kraft macaroni and boxed mashed potatoes. She loves some mashed potatoes. My mom had her return them the next day. Sister was salty. Number 5. I was in Costco and my son, who was about 5 at the time, ran up to me, grabbed my hand and started pulling me towards the next aisle. Dad! Dad! Look! Real ninjas! Whilst pointing at 2 women in full burqas. Number 6. My wife had my 3-year-old at the park one day. She decided to pick up some litter to make the park look nicer, so she was throwing away pop bottles, chip bags, etc., and he wanted to help. He stoops to pick up some cigarette butts and my wife says, "Leave those to mommy." She wasn't going to pick them up but didn't want him to touch them either. A few minutes later he went to play. He tells another mom, "I'm finding cigarettes for mommy." My wife was so embarrassed and said she got the dirtiest looks from nearby parents who heard this. Number 7. Commenter. I was with a group of friends and was asked if I drink. I said I don't really, and my daughter said, "But mom, you drink all the time." She had no idea the difference between drinking alcohol and drinking everything else. Person B. That is exactly why when my mom was pulled over once, I told the cop from the back seat she's drinking and driving too. I've been harping on her about that and she continued to tell me they meant alcohol, not soda, but I didn't believe her for some reason. My mom gave the cop a very flat, frustrated "It's Dr. Pepper." The cop laughed, "Thank goodness." Person C. Yup. Even told a police officer that my dad drinks and drives all the time. My poor dad. This was during a check stop. The police officer saw the coffee cups that my mom and dad always traveled with, and upon discovering no alcohol let us continue. He probably laughed with his coworkers after we left. After that my brother and I got the "don't say anything during a check stop" lecture. Number 8. My youngest sibling is 10 plus years my junior, so I grew up with him embarrassing me in public. The worst was around Christmas one year when we went to Walmart after going to a church service. The service was about the virgin birth and how no other virgin had ever had a baby before. My brother was probably about 4 to 5 at the time, so while he didn't know exactly what made someone a virgin, that service taught him virgins couldn't have babies. Anyway, we're in the checkout line and behind us is a woman who is obviously pregnant. My brother points to her and says very loudly, "Look, that lady isn't a virgin." Number 9. Me and my 3 years were at my mom's house, and to get her to leave I told her, "Come on, we have to go home and take a shower." To make her laugh I said we need a shower because our bums are stinky. Later when we got home in a full elevator, my daughter turns to me and says, "Mommy Niki." I was mortified. Number 10. Commenter. My son was 2 and thought every black man was his dad. He was away for the military a while, so when we were at Boston Market he called another random stranger daddy. And ran to him and hugged him. Ha, the guy actually picked him up and said, "I'm not your dad, but hey buddy." I was mortified but couldn't stop laughing. Person B. I did that same exact thing when I was little. My dad had moved out of the state for work and my mom and I temporarily stayed behind to sell the house. Apparently any white man with a beard was my father and I'd run shrieking "Daddy" at them. Person C. My niece used to do this to random men at Target and the grocery store. She was 3 and would wave at them from down the aisle and scream, "Hi Dada." Hi. If she was not in the cart she would run and hug their leg. She didn't care if they were with their own kids, wife, whoever. Her father was not in the military however. He was at home. My sister got some very bad looks from lots of wives/girlfriends of these random men. Number 11. My child isn't old enough to talk yet, but when I was little, and we were on holiday, my dad used to get me to say I was younger than I was so we could get into theme parks cheaper. When we were on our way back, the gentleman at passport control asked me how old I was and I turned to my dad and said, "How old am I today, Daddy?" Number 12. During a private Remembrance Day, Armistice Day, ceremony with veterans, my 3-year-old soiled her diaper. I changed her in a back room and when we came out, it was the moment of silence. She slammed the door and yelled to all the vets, "I just had a big poo. And it had peanuts in it." Number 13. At the grocery store, my daughter, who was 2 at the time, and I were about to pass an African American lady in an aisle. At this point, she had never seen anyone with a darker skin color such as hers. She's about 2 feet from us. So, she sees her, turns to me and yells, while pointing, "Look Mom. It's a chocolate lady." I froze for a second, said, "Yes honey, isn't she beautiful?" She yells yes, and I practically run away down the aisle. That poor lady was such a good sport. Edit bonus. We met a man with a hook for a hand and she sprinted up to him to ask him if he was Captain Hook. Facepalm. Luckily he said yes and pretended to run after her. Number 14. I took my daughter into the men's bathroom in a supermarket as she had to go. When in the cubicle, she did her business. I helped clean up, then we came out. I went over to the sinks to wash my hands and she pointed at a guy peeing in the urinal. Daddy, that man has a penis like you. He has a little penis and you have a big penis. I scooped her up and we left quickly. I felt so bad for that guy getting called out like that by a wee girl. Number 15. My daughter, 4, and I were in an old mom and pop country market, doing some light shopping, and they had just dropped some chicken into a deep fryer. I'm guessing the oil was multi-purpose, because it had a rather odd smell to it. Didn't faze me any, but my daughter was having none of that. Initially she was simply holding my hand and walking alongside me. At some point in time, I suppose the smell hit her, so she tugged on my shirt and wanted to pick it up. She's tiny, we'd been walking around for quite a bit, so I obliged. She took this moment to lean in a bit close to me and say, "It stinks in here, Daddy." I made the mistake of saying what? Which brought along an avalanche of her then declaring, quite loudly, "It stinks here, Daddy." She proceeded to do this for the remaining 15 minutes of our shopping, only pausing to bury her face in my chest and shoulder. I used this as an excuse to speed up my shopping process as I was getting the occasional side-eye and giggling from random passersby. As we approached the cashier, my daughter with her face buried in my chest, now mumbling "it stinks" without lifting her head, they were kind enough to ask my little girl how she was doing. Without missing a beat, my girl pulls herself away from me and leans towards the cashier and, once again, exclaims, "It stinks in here," before resuming her buried face. I shrug my shoulders, pay for my stuff and walk outside. My daughter then detects that we're no longer surrounded by the stench of bad frying oil and takes a huge, exaggerated breath with an exhale of relief. I have more. She was a character at that age. Number 16. My very white and blonde daughter was at McDonald's playing in the play area. There was a little black boy she was playing with. He had gone over to eat when his mom brought the food over to their table. My daughter didn't notice and she came over to me and very loudly asked me, "Where did the chocolate boy go?" His mom heard and looked over. I was mortified at the time, but now I just think it's funny. Number 17. We were eating out one night with my parents, who were in town visiting, when my son started staring at an overweight woman trying to fit into a chair. Seeing him staring, I tried to distract him, but he was having none of it. At the top of his lungs he said, "Mommy, that lady is too big for that chair." I was mortified, but my parents could barely hide their laughter. Number 18. My daughter was 3 and was learning the concept of big versus small at nursery. Cute, right? I picked her up from nursery one day, and had to run to the bank before heading home. It's our turn, I'm talking to the bank teller, and my daughter looks at me and goes, "Mama, you're big." "Yes baby, I'm big." She turns to the bank teller and goes, "I'm small, and you're big." Bank teller is laughing with my daughter, oohing and eyeing at how cute she's being, when all of a sudden, a little person walks up to the counter next to us. My daughter notices. She looks at him and screams, "Mama, look. It's a small man. Look Mama, he's small, so small Mama, look at how small." I've never wished for the floor to open up and swallow me whole more than that moment. I honestly wanted to die. Number 19. I was dating someone who had 3 kids. The missus had a headache, so she looked after the youngest while I went to do grocery shopping with the older 2. We were at the deli counter talking to the staff who served us regularly, and the exchange went something like this. Staff talking to the kids, "Isn't it nice of Daddy to help Mommy out with the shopping?" 4-year-old at the top of her lungs, "That's not my daddy." Suddenly staff and shoppers all turned around and stared. I can only imagine they thought I was a kidnapper or something. Number 20. I was walking in a Target store with my then 4-year-old daughter. It was a sale day, I forget what, and it was pretty crowded. She was getting tired of dodging carts and people, so she asked to be held. I put her on my shoulders to make navigating easier, and when I was walking down the center lane, this woman came out from the side, shoving her cart right in front of me and stopping to look at an end cap. I had to come to a sudden stop to avoid her, and my daughter slipped a bit. I straightened her up and then went around her, muttering "stupid bitch" under my breath. Well, my daughter heard, and as we passed the woman, my child turns her head and yells, "Stupid bitch." I heard a gasp from the woman, but I kept walking. Make sure to share your personal story in the comments below and have the opportunity to be featured in a future video. Also, if you like these topics, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to continue seeing more content like this every day. See you next time. Warning, this content may be disturbing to some audiences. Subscribe. If you dare. She would proceed to insult the workers. I always felt so ashamed that I could never look anyone in the eye. Hey everybody, welcome to AskReddit. People ask Reddit. Children of a Karen, what is it like? Number 1. Commenter. My mom is a reformed Karen. When I was a kid, she used to treat people in customer service like trash. When I was a teenager and in customer service positions, it finally dawned on her what a terrible human being she was being. She's turned around and been great ever since. I'm proud of her to recognize her faults and fix them. Person B. My mother too. It's a shame it took having to see their own kid in that role for them to understand that people are just people doing their jobs. But the point is they did eventually learn and are better people. Person C. Same with my mom. I started working retail and telling her stories of people yelling at me, and she hated that people would yell at me, so she stopped yelling at customer service people. Number 2. When I was a child, everything was someone else's fault. We'd speak to managers in stores/restaurants/ etc. When I came of age, I joined the military and moved away as fast as possible. As an adult, my relationship with her was terrible. I was so frustrated by her asking me to come back to visit her area every time we talked, that I just stopped talking to her. Something particularly interesting happened this past year. I went home to see my grandma on Dad's side as she was passing. I called my mom and told her I was taking an emergency trip and would be in the area but wouldn't have time to see her. Her response? That's fine, I understand your family needs you. I was beside myself. I had known that she was working on herself for a while, but living so far away and speaking so little, I hadn't witnessed it. 5 years ago, she would have demanded that I leave my dying grandma to come see her. I came back to the area the next month and we discussed it more. She said that she realized that a lot of problems in her life and a lot of the unhappiness stems from selfishness. I am incredibly proud of the changes she's made in her life. And it has forced me to reevaluate my own actions pertaining to our strained relationship and my life as a whole. And I've come to a conclusion. I'm just like her. Number 3. Commenter. My dad is a male Karen. I always hated listening to him call customer service on the phone, because he's such a complete asshole to whoever is just trying to do their job. Person B. I honestly think male Karens are worse, because they don't seem to understand how being loud and angry as a guy can be really frightening for some people. They're also more likely to actually get violent or start screaming. Person C. My dad was the same way. Complete shit to any worker who said something he didn't want. I remember him knocking over displays just for a laugh. Person D. I get this. Haven't had a relationship with my father for 9 years, and 4 months ago I found myself in the town he lives in. After being there for 10 minutes, the Domino's delivery driver shows up and he loses his shit on her for no reason. She explained she was late because someone hit her car, and I personally pulled her aside to apologize. Threw me right back into my past, never want to deal with that again. Person E. You just made me realize my dad is also a male Karen. For example, on the phone the other day, he told my sister to write a letter to the corporate office of some restaurant chain because her order was slightly wrong and demanded a refund. He also said it with such anger and fury that would be more suited to a commander yelling at his soldiers to get their shit together in the middle of a war zone. Number 4. Commenter. Frankly, it's embarrassing. You have to sit there while they shriek at a manager and cause a big scene. If you try to chime in, you get yelled at, then they are in a bad mood the rest of the day. I've sat through hour-long debates with managers over 11 cents disparity on a bill. Everyone is looking at you and you are just kind of trapped there. Person B. Restaurants, stores especially, or anywhere else we went, there were long, loud debates with managers. Everyone is looking and you're trapped. Thankfully, as I got older, I would retreat to the car. It is humiliating. Person C. This reminds me of my parents. They argued and made a scene in public that setting an upper age limit for a child buffet was age discrimination, and then I got yelled at for not saying that I wanted the child's buffet. I did say child's buffet, but the poor server did only her job correctly and rung it up as a normal buffet. Now as an adult, I do recognize that I have some Karen moments that I'm not proud of. But they're rare and mostly surface after all normal attempts at obtaining proper resolution fails. The most recent instance I can think of was when I snapped at a store manager at a local warehouse club because their fuel pumps refused to accept credit cards at the terminal. Since they were so poorly maintained, they couldn't read any card that was inserted. This was after filing numerous complaints over a span of months, and recording and submitting videos that would demonstrate that it would take up to 6 to 7 minutes of attempts for the fuel pump to accept the credit card, brand new card BTW. The pumps finally work now at least. Number 5. When my siblings and I were younger, she was great, but she's become more insufferable as she's gotten older. She has 2 voices, a talking to us voice and a talking to other people voice. Her other people voice is very serial killer-like. She tells us not to shop at certain stores or stay at certain types of hotels when we travel because they are ghetto. She is never ever wrong. For anything. Even when I tear an argument of hers to shreds, she makes me apologize. I've never received an apology from her in my life, even when she screamed in my face for absolutely no reason. She's not exactly the let me speak to your manager type, but she will leave crappy reviews on Google or Facebook if she doesn't like the service. Speaking of which, she is the queen of Facebook. The first couple months of the pandemic she wouldn't stop posting about how we all need to go back to living. Now that the protests have started, she's been ranting about how she didn't sit in the house for 2 months for it to be ruined by protesters. I've had to learn to just ignore it and be thankful I don't live with her anymore. It may also be worth mentioning my mom is a second-generation Karen. My grandma is the literal textbook definition of Karen. She's almost 80 years old and I still can't go to restaurants with her because I never know what she's going to say or do. My generation's Karen seems to be my brother. However, my fiancé already knows that if I ever start showing any traits of Karen, then he is to immediately put me out of my misery. Number 6. My parents are lovely people on the whole, but they are unbelievably entitled when they go to restaurants. I spoke up about it every time and they'd brush it off. Such behaviors include: when there's a clear wait to be seated situation, they'll just walk in and sit down at any table, even if it's unbussed. They will get multiple drinks, beer, soda, water with lemon, coffee. Really anything refillable. Ask questions a normal waiter doesn't have the answers to, like what's the rent here or what's the history of the building. I stopped going to restaurants with them a couple of years ago. Even a free meal isn't worth the frustration. Number 7. It was humiliating. My mother treated everyone in the service industry as if they were idiot peasants placed there to serve her exclusively. However, she usually never brought her children out in public, so I was spared the majority of her behavior. She has always looked shockingly young for her age, and it always seemed like she had kids really young, so that was a part of it. The other part was that she hated how I looked. We're an Asian family and I was always overweight, a complete taboo for women. She would comment about my appearance to every single stranger she could. Doctors, Target employees, other kids, etc. Whenever she was forced to buy me clothing, she would comment to every worker how nothing looked good on me because I was ugly and fat. Then she would proceed to insult the workers. I always felt so ashamed by both actions that I could never look anyone in the eye. I could feel their pity radiating out and it was humiliating. I didn't want anyone to feel bad for me. I didn't want their damn sympathy. I didn't want to be a major point of ridicule. It has led to a lifetime of having too much pride. It's hard to laugh at myself now and I take myself way too seriously. I struggle to act less serious, but I spent so much time being laughed at. I can't take it and I hate it when anyone talks shit about anyone, even if they deserve it. I have openly refused to trash talk a non-public figure for a long time. It's always toxic, especially if you wouldn't say it to their face. My mother would also use her first language to openly insult people all the time. She bled entitlement. It was horrific. Number 8. I have no idea who is worse between my father, my mother, my oldest sister and my older sister. Dad will belittle anyone who crosses him, demanding to speak to managers, threatening litigation, calls to authorities, etc. He is always concerned that somebody is out to get him and is extremely cautious of scammers. Door-to-door solicitors or people calling are in for a treat if they are sorry enough to get him. Customer representatives over the phone have no idea how to manage him. He is surprisingly very nice when things are going smooth though. Mom is a textbook restaurant Karen. She is fortunately nice about it, but will request changes, comments on everything, etc. But she is impossible to please. I get it when I do anything for her. Oldest sister has my dad's temper and my mom's demands, without either of their niceness. Plus she is well married so she is insanely entitled. Older sister is just temper, will just yell at people. They are my family and I love them, but I hate it when I see any of their awful ways in me. Hopefully Karen shaming will get them soon and they understand the wrong of their ways. Number 9. My mom is a Karen to service people sometimes. She can range from mildly rude to a total monster at times. I used to make excuses, like one time when she worked as a realtor and in the middle of buying something retail, stepped away a bit to take a phone call. The lady had this obvious "are you kidding" that couldn't wait another minute to finish this kinda expression. I tried to smooth it over like "oh sorry, she's at work always even when she's not at work" kinda thing. Lady responded "it's still rude" and tbh that was the first moment I realized yeah, my mom is rude. Now if she's unreasonable I straight up tell her off. Usually ends in the two of us fighting and me apologizing to whoever just got yelled at. The worst was after my grandma died, she took her feelings out on everyone. After her being rude to a waitress for no reason, my brother told me to ease up since she just lost her mom. I replied, every one of us here just lost a person we love but they give her no right to treat others like crap. Especially for no reason. Number 10. My mom was slowly treading down the path to parenthood. I would just hang my head and be embarrassed, but I didn't really know why it was so wrong. Well, a few years in retail fixed that right the F up. So when that shit started up again I calmly explained that she's getting pissy at the wrong person and has to follow the same rules everyone else does. She shouldn't expect special treatment just because she's angry. Fortunately, she took the road less traveled and made an effort to be more understanding and calm. Number 11. Effing terrible. She would yell at any person trying to help her if they said anything she just didn't like or agree with. Not only do I have anxiety from all that horse shit, but I also now go out of my way to be nice to anyone providing me a service as much as I can. I also make it my mission to make them laugh so they can be comfortable. My husband and I like to trade stories of when we can get people to smile or laugh. One time that sticks with me is when my couch was being delivered by Macy's. I was just in the living room doing my usual shit of saying funny things and just being my weird self trying to make the two guys comfortable in my home. One of the guys stopped as he was cleaning up all the plastic that the couch was wrapped in and said to me, "Thank you for being so nice. Most people don't even look at us." I was floored. Not for the compliment, but that people would treat another human being that way. Just terrible. Also, shout out to my dad for always teaching me to be kind. My husband and I once took him out to Outback Steakhouse for his birthday, and when the waiter came to take our order my dad insisted he sit down in the booth next to him because he didn't think he should have to stand to wait on us. I know that's where I get my kookiness from, but I love it. Being kind takes no effort. Make sure to share your personal story in the comments below and have the opportunity to be featured in a future video. Also, if you like these topics don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to continue seeing more content like this every day. See you next time. Warning, this content may be disturbing to some audiences. Subscribe. If you dare. Mom would get all dolled up, leave her wedding ring on the kitchen counter, and come home very late, clearly drunk, and sometimes brought men home with her that she introduced as her friends. Hey everybody, welcome to AskReddit. People ask Reddit. Babysitters of Reddit, what seemingly normal parents had dark secrets? Number 1. Somewhat wholesome story. I used to babysit for the kids down the street when I was in high school. One night I went into the parents' bedroom to get something, I think a puzzle, and there was a book on the nightstand called How to Comfort Your Kids When You're Thinking of Divorce or something like that. The next time I was over, there was a book downstairs, on the mom's desk, that was the couple's therapist's guide to saving a failing relationship. It made me sad because the parents seemed really happy together whenever I saw them. I felt bad that they must have been going through a hard time behind the scenes. My parents had a pretty unhappy marriage, so I tried to be extra nice to the kids. I hoped they hadn't had to listen to their parents fighting. Anyway, this went on for a few months with no further indications of trouble. I felt like I knew this awful secret that the kids didn't know. One night I came over to babysit. The mom was in grad school and she had a class, and the same books were sitting on the counter. As the mom was leaving, she was like, "Oh, I can't forget the textbooks," and grabbed them off the counter. I actually didn't know what she was studying, so I asked what class she had. Turns out she was studying to be a couples and family therapist. The books I saw were her school books. In retrospect, that made complete sense because the titles were kind of academic, but I immediately assumed they were divorcing. Number 2. My daddy hits my mommy sometimes. For that one, I was still in high school. I told my mom what she said and my mom went to the police station to report it. I like it when you're here, not the other lady. She's mean and she makes me sit in the closet. This little girl was referring to her dad's girlfriend. I told the dad about it and never saw the girlfriend around again. And for some comic relief, my older brother and I play swords in the bathroom. Daddy taught us how. Asked him to show me with his action figures what he meant, expecting the worst, and he said look. and goes in his dad's closet and pulls out these giant foam swords. Phew. Thankfully not all in the same house. Number 3. I used to be a nanny for a family. At the interview they seemed totally normal, even the first day wasn't too terrible. I quickly realized that both parents were abusive, mom had severe anger issues, and was medicated for some condition related to it. Dad was a borderline sexual predator who constantly talked about how gross looking his wife was, and how if she didn't stop being a bitch, he'd divorce her. Their kids were just as bad, one of them was also medicated for behavioral issues. I found out later that the reason they were hiring a nanny opposed to daycare was because their kids had been kicked out of the daycares in the area. Nope the F out of that situation within a few months. Number 4. I nannied for this very rich family with 3 kids from the West Coast who would come to South Florida for summer vacation every year. The mother was in her 30s, clearly had her kids when she was young, and was very stereotypically hot, blonde, thin, big boobs, perfect teeth. Her husband was a little older, salt and pepper, super handsome, very George Clooney-esque. Their kids were all blonde-haired, blue-eyed, cute as F. They absolutely adored their parents. Dad would help the kids and mom settle in at the house and then fly back to Cali for work. I babysat 3 to 5 times a week, 6:30 p.m. to 2 a.m. Mom would get all dolled up, leave her wedding ring on the kitchen counter, and come home very late, clearly drunk, and sometimes brought men home with her that she introduced as her friends. She would often overpay me, which I never complained about, but I worried for the kids. Number 5. I babysat a lot when I was 13 to 15. At the time I lived in a small town. I was a very popular babysitter as I also worked at the daycare center. Often I would have kids from 2 or 3 different families at once. I didn't care. I got triple the pay for having 3 different groups of kids. I was recently told why I always had groups of kids like that. Turns out the small town had a swingers club and I was the go-to babysitter for their different groups. Number 6. Commenter. One family I still don't know what was up with them. It's like they were squatting in a model home or something. It was a fully furnished house that looked to be straight out of Better Homes and Gardens magazine, but there was nothing in the drawers, fridge or cabinets. No toiletries in the bathroom except for toilet paper, no food or silverware in the kitchen, no clothes in the closets or in the kids' drawers, and no toys. The lady just told me to order food for the kids and they watched TV. It was weird. Person B. It could have been a second home or, well, not very good parents. Number 7. I used to babysit for my next door neighbor who had an 8-year-old girl and a 5-year-old boy. I was 13 when I started babysitting for them and I knew off the bat the kids were an interesting duo, to say the least, and I have too many stories to tell from when I was watching them. We all went to school together, so when we got off the bus, we'd walk to their apartment and I'd watch them, make sure we got homework done, and make them the snack of the day. One day, we had a half day at school and I think the mom forgot, because when we walked into the apartment, I heard one of the doors shut. At the time, we thought it was an intruder, so I grabbed the 5-years baseball bat, told them to stay in the room, and I'd do some investigating. I opened the bathroom door, and there was the mom, half naked, with a guy that wasn't her husband. She gave me all the money in her wallet and her business card. She was a photographer, and told me to never speak of it again. I caught her cheating and made out with $400 and a $650 photo shoot package, took pictures for all the upcoming holidays so I could keep giving gifts to my family. I babysat them for about 3 months after, before they moved away. Number 8. I was babysitting once and the kids were wrestling in the living room. All of a sudden the smell of dank filled the room. I hear the kids stop and say, "What is that?" One of them had knocked over a big tin can on a shelf and the parents we'd stashed spilled everywhere. I sent the kids away and cleaned it all up for them and put it back. Number 9. Commenter. A family member of mine was a babysitter in the 70s. A couple who lived nearby asked her to babysit their baby a few times. I didn't get the sense that she knew them well. Every time she'd go they said the baby was sleeping and not to disturb the baby by checking on it. The baby never cried. The parents would come home and relieve her. She never saw or heard a baby. At the time I don't think my family member thought much of it, but has told me this story several times because it keeps nagging at her. How could a baby be asleep for the entire time she was there, every time? No noises. Nothing. Today, she thinks there must not have been a baby but has no idea why they'd hire her. Person B. We have babysitters come usually after the kids are asleep just because it's easier. Once they're sleeping through the night, they're not going to wake up randomly. Could have just been something like that. Also could have been a weird demon baby they didn't have any to unleash on the world but also just needed a night out to themselves. Demon babies can be exhausting. Number 10. Commenter. This reminds me of a weird babysitting job that I had once also in the 70s. I got a call from a woman who said that she got my number from a friend. She couldn't remember who, though. She sent a taxi to pick me up and I still remember feeling kind of freaked out, like this was very sketchy. The taxi pulled up at a very old apartment building. For some reason it totally reminded me of the building from Rosemary's Baby. There were 2 women there. The place was just one giant room with a kitchen and bathroom off of it. The lights were dim and the room seemed to be full of beds. But all of the beds were on angles, or pushed together, and there were tons of bedding and clothes all over the place. Whoever I spoke to on the phone told me that there was one 7-year-old boy. But I could clearly see that there were at least 5 kids aged about a year up to maybe 5. No boy who looked to anything close to 7. And all of the kids had longish hair and looked really neglected. The women didn't say much, except that they'd be back around 11 o'clock. It was only 6 o'clock in the evening and all of the kids were asleep and stayed asleep except for one toddler who woke up kind of whining, crying for a minute or 2. I couldn't really tell how many kids were there. The blankets and beds were all crazy. There was no food in the fridge. No milk, no nothing. Nothing in the cupboards. There was no TV, which was a real hardship for me. There was only one book. I think it was called Every Woman's Handbook, and it was basically a feminist book about women's bodies. I sat there and read it since there was nothing else to do. After an hour or so I could hear this noise in the kitchen. It literally sounded like a man making demon noises through the kitchen sink drain. Totally scared the shit out of me. A 13-year-old me was certain that this woman hired me to stay there and then had someone try to scare me. This was Victoria, BC, during a time when everyone was talking about the satanic church being a big thing, and I was sure that these women, and the demonic sink talker, were Satanists and that I was going to get murdered that night. Oh, and did I mention that they didn't have a phone? The women came back promptly at 11 o'clock. They paid me a little bit more than what they said they would, which was fair since there were more kids than I was told. Altogether a really freaky night. I was blown away by the fact that the kids were asleep and stayed asleep. Did they drug them? They sent me home in a cab and I was scared for weeks that they were going to show up and kidnap me or ask me to babysit again. And I was never able to find out how they got my number. Person B. It could have been the upstairs neighbors draining their sink after washing dishes. I live in the same city and our sink does occasionally sound demonic. Number 11. I used to babysit when I was around 13 to 14-ish. My neighbors and 3 kids, ages 4, 7, and 11. The house was really nice, always clean and tidy. One time they asked me to babysit for a couple hours. Okay, no big deal. They paid me $6 an hour. When I got there they made the kids shake my hand and say thank you for babysitting us. I thought it was weird, but it was whatever. The parents left and the kids wanted those dinosaur chicken nuggets, so I made them some. As they were eating, the 7-year-old asked for a toy. She said it was in her parents' dresser. I didn't want to snoop around, but if she wanted the toy, I would get it for her. I went into the parents' room and found the dresser. I opened the first one and all I see are stacks of cash. Okay. Weird, but not my business. I went back out to ask the girl what dresser drawer it was in. She goes over and literally points at the second drawer and says, "Oh, don't open that one, it has bags of sugar in it." That's what I hear mommy say. I was like, oh. Okay then. She grabs her toy from the 4th drawer and runs off. I did take a peek in the drawer and sure enough, under the socks were bags of cocaine. I was shocked, but I didn't say anything. I put everything back where it was and left the room. When the parents got back I took the cash and left. Never babysat there again. TLDR, babysat some kids and found cocaine in the parents' drawer. I babysit 3 to 5 times a week. You'd be surprised at how many sex toys I see. A lot of them are just out in the open. Like they forgot to hide them. I overnighted once in the guest bed at bondage straps. Parents totally forgot about that. That's not too surprising. But some of their kinks are. Probably the darkest was this 5-year-old girl I babysit. She was the victim of sexual assault for a couple years by an aunt and uncle. No charges pressed or anything. Mom and dad just cut all contact with that side of the family. I live in a small town, so I see the aunt pretty often. It's sickening. They understandably have a ton of cameras set up in their house now and aren't gone for more than a couple hours. The child has a very weird bedtime routine, which is how I found out. Make sure to share your personal story in the comments below and have the opportunity to be featured in a future video. Also, if you like these topics, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to continue seeing more content like this every day. See you next time. Warning, this content may be disturbing to some audiences. Subscribe, if you dare. The kid couldn't remember what he complained about to his dad, and the dad couldn't remember why he brought his kid in. Hey everybody, welcome to AskReddit. People ask Reddit. Doctors of Reddit, what's the biggest case of faking it you've ever seen? Number 1. Taking trauma calls during surgery residency, had a prisoner come in after a fight and claimed he couldn't move or feel his legs. All the CT scans and MRIs were normal, but we would shield his legs so he couldn't see them and poke them with needles and other sharp objects, with enough force to cause pain. He never flinched or moved his legs at all. He was diagnosed with SIWRA, spinal cord injury without radiographic abnormality. He stayed in the hospital for a week, no improvement. Always had one guard with him. One night they were down in the lobby watching some television, but the guard needed to use the restroom. The patient said, "Where could I possibly go? I'm paralyzed." Guard left him alone for 2 minutes. Patient last seen sprinting down the road, naked butt cheeks flapping in the breeze. Made it to a city 4 hours away by car before he was caught again. I have never seen anyone fake it so well. Truly playing the long con. Number 2. Dermatologist here. Patient was convinced she had a melanoma and needed a biopsy and would need to be on workers' comp. I told her it looked like ink from a marker. She demanded a biopsy. I wiped the area off with an alcohol swab and showed her the ink and that there was no spot on her skin anymore. She stormed out threatening to sue. I'm just glad I cured her melanoma. Number 3. Commenter. Had a patient come in for a fall who now couldn't move their legs at all. Did a bunch of tests, didn't find anything. The patient was not at all fazed by suddenly being paralyzed, which was the first red flag. Didn't really believe anything was wrong, but the patient was still not moving their legs. My options are to admit for a huge workup or get them to walk. So I update them saying everything is fine, tests are negative, you can go home. Patient gets up, gets dressed and walks out without a word. Person B. I had a woman come in from an extremely minor MVC and the medic suddenly went from normal to just yelling incoherently in pain and refusing to move her legs, so they activated a trauma. I keep trying to get her to move her legs, but all she did was keep screaming, so when we rolled her I just said, last chance, if you don't move your legs I gotta do a rectal exam. That did it. Stops yelling, moves her legs. Chronic pain patients turn out, no acute findings. Number 4. Commenter. We had a patient faking a seizure, so my supervisor told one of us to get the brain needle. The patient made a miraculous and swift recovery without intervention. Person B. Same, pseudo seizures that had the patient hospitalized for a week. I started threatening intubation with a laryngoscope right by his head and miraculously stopped seizing each time nearly instantly. Remarkable recovery. Number 5. Young, 18 to 20, woman went running into a small rural hospital ER pretending to have abdominal pain. Police officer had tagged her going 40+ km over the limit, which was stunt driving as per the new law in Ontario, impound and license suspension automatic. Cop followed her into the ER and apparently said he'd be waiting for her when she left. Locum staff such as myself were housed at a small B&B about 15 minutes away, and the ER had pre-printed order sets to be done before we arrived. When I arrived she flat out admitted that she just came in because she freaked out and didn't stop. I told her we'd give her 45 minutes to call her parents/family before I booted her. Except, HCG came back positive, and subsequent ultrasound came back showing extremely early ectopic. Officer figures out something is up when he hears an air ambulance call come in over the radio. She was completely asymptomatic and just worked out that she dodged both charges and a life-threatening issue by accident. It was definitely a WTF moment. Number 6. Pediatric neuropsychologist. Got a referral for more or less consolidation care. Patient was 13, wheelchair bound, required therapeutic oxygen, seizures, arthritis, musculoskeletal problems, suspected autism, completely nonverbal, severe behavior challenges, the list goes on. He was being followed by at least 8 different specialties, clearly none of whom were communicating with each other, and the med list was 18 prescriptions long, including some incredibly heavy-duty stuff, opioids, antipsychotics, antiepileptics, that sort of stuff. Got kicked to me after his umpteenth ER trip because the ER doc felt something was off and he needed someone to look at the whole picture. Factitious disorder by caregiver, or Munchausen by proxy. All of the original symptoms were reported, going back to about a year old. It had possibly started with a febrile seizure, fever-induced seizure, in infancy, but this was never witnessed by anyone but mom. It's unclear. She had been telling docs different things. She was convinced her son had all these disorders, told him he was going to die any day. He got a Make-A-Wish trip, donations, etc. He was removed from her custody and taken off most of his meds. Within a few weeks he was out of the wheelchair playing basketball, no oxygen, super talkative and friendly, no behavior problems. He did have a pretty significant intellectual disability, but there's no way to say if that was organic or the result of the prescription cocktail he had been fed all his life. Hopefully with some good therapy and a stable home, he can continue to make progress. Number 7. Physical therapist here. Working mom comes into the clinic with her infant in a stroller. She's limping like she's got a nail in her foot. Wincing in pain and tears in her eyes. She's crying during her visit with the PT. None of us think she's faking it. She limped out of the clinic. I glanced out of the window and saw this woman bounding down the sidewalk. Hips swaying, full stride, going places. We were all fools. I'm sure it was workers' comp. This was years ago, as a tech before PT school. The situation lined up pretty obviously for a workers' comp scheme. Lots of kids at home, 2 working parents just getting by. I hesitate to even mention the specific situation, because now, as an experienced PT, I've seen so many situations that aren't actually what they seem. I hate to assume. Number 8. Whenever we had kids, usually teenagers, playing up their symptoms to extend their hospital stay, we would order them into a healthy lifestyle. Lights out at 9, no screen time for 2 hours before bedtime, healthy diet chock full of fruits and vegetables, screen time limits, minimum number of laps around the unit per day to get ahead in their exercise. They got better so much faster with our healthy lifestyle tips. Number 9. This patient comes in for back pain with weakness of the legs. Gets a full workup with MRI, standard blood work, and then some immunological things to look for stuff like myasthenia gravis. No neurological or immunological explanation for the weakness. Patient is seen by physical therapy and they are of the opinion that the patient is holding back intentionally. Go to see the patient at the end of the day and prep them for discharge. Patient is infuriated that they're being discharged. Yelling and screaming about how they aren't better, how they're disappointed in the institution, blah blah blah. They said one particular thing that still clearly stands out 3 to 4 years later. I can't believe you're sending me home already. I haven't even told my family I'm here, and now you're going to send me home before they even have the chance to see me. My attending and I leave the room to arrange things with the nurses. We go back in and the patient is out of bed and standing up in the middle of the room. Miraculously the patient is able to walk with zero assistance when they had so much difficulty with any assistance over the previous 2 days. At that point, they were enraged and we went into the room without knocking. They were discharged home after a conversation regarding abuse of medical services. Number 10. Had a patient when I was an intern feigning blindness. She would constantly be playing on her smartphone, only furiously trying to hide it when someone from the care team came into her room. The best was when my attending one day strolled past her room and threw his hand up in a highly exaggerated hello wave. She started to throw her arm up but caught herself halfway through, then threw her hand back into her lap and pretended to be staring off into nothing. Number 11. I once saw a patient who had been faking paralysis of the legs for years. Used a wheelchair, never walked, etc. Old records showed extensive imaging, neurology consults, and other tests that proved the patient had full function of all extremities. Family/friends were just going along with it. Not sure if it was really conversion disorder or if the patient had some secondary gain issue. Number 12. When I was a medical student I worked in the pediatric side of the emergency room, and we would give popsicles to all the kids. One afternoon an 8-year-old came in with his father, and I asked what was wrong. The kid couldn't remember what he complained about to his dad, and the dad couldn't remember why he brought his kid in. The kid's mom was a nurse, she was working at another hospital at the time, and she was the one that would keep track of these things. Anyway, after a few minutes trying to figure out what was going on the kid asked, "So, can I have my popsicle now?" The kid was 100% healthy. Unfortunately we reinforced bad behavior and both the kid and the dad subsequently left with popsicles. Number 13. Years ago I had a patient who had been rear-ended in an auto accident a few weeks before I saw her. She had a history of lupus. She was decked out in the usual crippled paraphernalia, crutches, neck brace, elbow braces, wrist braces, knee braces, and could barely walk. I saw her a couple of times and she showed no improvement. One Saturday I was on call but had to take a back streets route to the hospital because of an event taking place on the main thoroughfare. I apparently drove through her neighborhood, because, wonders behold, there she was wearing old lady spandex power walking down the sidewalk, holding weights in both hands. I did not call out to her. Next week, she was back in the clinic, with her crippled get up on again. A few weeks later I got the subpoena for the deposition, and it all became clear. I could not have sworn, under oath, that I had absolutely positively identified the woman power walking. I know it was her. I later confirmed she lived in that area. She and her attorney could have argued that it was her sister or daughter or cousin or whatever. So I just honestly answered all the questions during the deposition. Many I could not answer because I did not see her immediately after the accident. I could, however, honestly say that I thought she had a good prognosis and was likely to recover fully. BTW, it is not unusual for patients seeking compensation through some legal process to exaggerate the degree of their injuries. Everybody involved in the process understands this. It is however incumbent upon the patient to maintain their act in a believable fashion. Number 14. Audiologist, hearing specialist, have worked in the private sector with legal claims, and with the VA handling veterans' claims of hearing loss. With those two populations, having people faking hearing loss is pretty common. Now, as a professional, for me the hearing test starts when I call the person's name from the waiting room. In a normal voice I call them. If they answer I already know that they're normal/no worse than mild loss. This was the case with this guy. He answered and came in, we had a normal conversation. So, case history over, time to test. I give the instructions over the headphones at a reasonable 50 decibels. Raise your hand when you hear the tone. 50 decibels tone, should be easy and clear, but he doesn't raise his hand. I go up. And up, and up. Finally, I'm putting a 100 decibels tone in his ear. He's flinching from pain. It's so loud, but he doesn't raise his hand to indicate he's heard the tone, even with re-instruction. I immediately know what I'm dealing with. I have taught entire classes on how to spot and try to get estimated true results from people trying to fake it. Long story short, I wrote a damning report outlining all his inconsistencies and faking behaviors. The thing that made this one so memorable is that we had such a pleasant conversation before. He was a fire chief. I have firefighters in my family. It was one of those where you think if it wasn't for professional/patient appropriate distance, we could hang and be friends. But then, this guy was determined to get a disability rating, and it just pissed me off. Make sure to share your personal story in the comments below and have the opportunity to be featured in a future video. Also, if you like these topics, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to continue seeing more content like this every day. See you next time. Warning, this content may be disturbing to some audiences. Subscribe. If you dare. She's draped in black clothing that seems wet. Skeleton hands but, a very soft, feminine, young face. Eyes like black holes. Hey everybody, welcome to ANECDOSED. People ask Reddit. Victims of sleep paralysis, what was your run-in with the sleep paralysis demon like? Number 1. Commenter. I get this on a regular basis, but mostly when I nap, not when I go to sleep for the night. I have never experienced the demon, but the experience is terrifying. I can see everything, or at least it seems like I can, but I am unable to move. It feels like if I don't make every effort to move I will be stuck like that forever. I usually have to start by wiggling a toe, or a finger, and then keep that momentum going until I fully wake. It takes an extreme amount of effort, and if I don't keep the effort constant, I have to start all over again. Person B. Yeah, that's the same for me too. The feeling is usually accompanied by a fear of closing my eyes or falling back asleep. Person C. This is exactly like my experiences. Only during sleep at odd times of the day, and I never experienced a demon. It's happened about a half dozen times now, and now that I can identify it when it's happening, I no longer struggle and panic. I just force myself to stay calm and go back to sleep. Person D. Same here, except I'm going to die of heart attack if I don't move. Crazy. Number 2. Commenter. I've only experienced it 3 times, but my first time was the worst. I've never had any visual encounters, but when it happened the first time I was laying on my left side and started to feel that pressure on my chest. When I realized I was paralyzed and started panicking, something whispered in my ear just coming in to say goodnight. That's when I felt like something was pushing me towards the edge of my bed. Terrifying stuff. Person B. Same here, no visual encounters. I don't panic anymore as I'm used to it. It's just a bit annoying and unnerving. I had the auditory thing once, freaked the hell out of me. It's a good thing I understand the causes of sleep paralysis or else I'd be a mess. Person C. When you are sleeping, your brain essentially paralyzes you so you don't act out your dreams. Sleep paralysis occurs when you are in between that paralyzed state and consciousness. You are halfway between being awake and dreaming, which could explain some hallucinations. TL. Doctor, you are somewhat awake but your brain still thinks you are asleep.
Number 3.
Commenter. This is word for word what I experience 2-3 times a month. Except it's an obviously feminine voice telling me, go back to sleep or, good night, baby, and I can see her face and body. She's draped in black clothing that seems wet. Skeleton hands but, a very soft, feminine, young face. Eyes like black holes. She's always sitting on my chest. I like to refer to her as bitch. When she leaves me alone I go flying through infinity. Person B. Your flying through infinity provokes me to respond, because it's just so similar to an experience I had. It's uncanny. Without going into too much detail on my history of sleep paralysis, I've had a lot of it. All my life. My response is always rage. Uncontrollable outright rage like I never feel while awake. It's a response of pure instinct, and I wish I could change it. I wish I could thank the thing that is causing it. That might sound weird, but here's why. I'm not a superstitious person. I always believed, even since I was a child, that my sleep disorders, including paralysis and lucid dreams, were neurological in nature. Then one night something different happened. It had never happened before and has never happened again. I had short out-of-body experiences before, mostly just limb pop-out, or sitting up and leaving my body laying down. It's hard to explain. The following occurred after many of these experiences, so I was not afraid or shocked by them at this point. It's par for the course. One night as I was trying to fall asleep, my arm fell through the bed. Obviously my physical arm was still laying on the bed. Usually when this happens I just pick my arm up, but this time I got curious. How long would it last? So I started waving my arm around, and my shoulder slipped through. This was new and exciting. I moved my fingers around, swung my arm around some more, and got bold. I consciously attempted to push my head through the bed. It worked. But what I saw was nothing. I don't mean I couldn't see, but it was as if something was in fact nothing in this place. I must sound totally bonkers right now. I could feel, though, that there was something farther away. My fear being exactly zero at this point, and my curiosity impossible to control, I threw caution to the wind, and tried to reach out as far as I could for whatever it was I could feel out there. Big mistake. My leg slipped. The rest of my torso slipped. My other arm slipped, and my hips started to fall in. At the very last moment, when my left leg was all that was attached, and it was about to go, I realized somehow that what I was reaching for was not a thing I wanted to interact with. There was fear. Of an intensity equal to my rage during sleep paralysis. Fear like I've never experienced. At this point I tried to pull back but there was nothing I could do. I tried to swing my leg back up to smash into my body, but it was stretched down, like being pulled into a void. My other knee slipped, nothing but my foot ankle down and part of my left hip holding me up at this point. I was pretty sure I was about to be gone. Whatever that means. Just at that last second, something reached in, grabbed my shoulder and yanked me back up. Like it was nothing. I can't really explain this properly either. The hand felt solid. Powerful. Like I was in its natural habitat. It pulled me back up with all the difficulty of lifting a cotton ball. I slammed back into my body with a feeling of finality. As if to say, no effing way I'm letting you fall into that. Directly and immediately into a state of sleep paralysis. This is the one time I just laid there. No fear, no rage, no attempt to move. My instincts said whatever was pinning me down had just saved my ass from something I probably never want to understand. I've continued to have regular sleep-related issues since that day, and to my shame I've continued to react as I always do. I rarely have any reasoning ability during my episodes. Just running on pure instinct. But I can tell you for absolute certainty that, if what I was falling into is your infinity, you want nothing to do with what's on the other side of it. And your bitch might just be doing what she is doing to save you from it. Think about it. Just for a moment I'll take a superstitious lane. What would it feel like to have your soul locked into your body so that it couldn't be pulled out? Probably a lot like paralysis. Still wish I could thank it. Number 4. I am Mexican, and my good friend's mom has a story about this that chills me to the bone every time. In her village in Mexico, one night she woke up to a dark demon-like figure sitting on her chest and she could not get up. Fearing for the safety of her young son who was awake playing in the room at the time, she told him, "Go to the neighbor's house and ask for help." And he, not seeing the demon, said okay and went next door. The demon then turned back to my friend's mom and started to taunt her. She just swore at it and tried not to be afraid until finally it stood up, climbed off, and walked out through the walls. She went outside to go to the neighbor's house where her son was, but stopped to see the whole village standing outside their doors with baseball bats and kitchen knives. She asked what happened and they all claimed to see a dark figure walk straight through their walls through all the houses down the street. No one ever spoke of it again. But on a funny note, her son had forgotten why he was sent to the neighbor's house and just told them he was hungry and they fixed him a snack. Number 5. I've had 3 sleep paralysis events in my life. 1. I saw a cat-sized shadow creature at the base of my bed and it slowly crawled up onto my sheets and finally up to my chest. I felt uncomfortable. 2. Another time I saw a shadow man walking around my room, disappearing behind my open door. This was the scariest one I've had so far. 3. This one was the best. I saw a couple of surreal-looking penguins walking around my bedroom. It was amusing and funny. Number 6. I get bouts of sleep paralysis every couple of weeks, and I also see shadow people as opposed to what people normally associate with sleep paralysis. Pretty terrifying. Interesting you should mention a shadowy cat-sized creature though. One of my worst events, where my paralysis kind of merged with lucid dreaming, involved a strange shadow cat. Number 7. I actually have it fairly often, so much now that I realize when it's occurring. These days I just close my eyes and won't open them no matter what I feel or hear. Doing this though doesn't force me to wake up and I still have to wait for it to end. I still feel and hear everything. Sometimes I feel like I'm being dragged somewhere or just constantly feel like something is touching me along with muffled voices. Before I learned to cope with it, I've seen quite a few awful things. Horror films don't really do anything for me anymore because I've already seen the most terrifying things I already could. Here's a few things I remember off the top of my head. A little girl in the corner of my room staring at me. Then, without notice, she shrieks and runs up and starts choking me. A large dark figure, kind of a human silhouette, emerging from the foot of my bed and staring down at me. Something banging and scraping on my bedroom door. I keep it locked at night because I have had ones where it opens by itself. Edit, no, the door isn't open when I wake up. It only opens in the dream. My bedroom door opening by itself followed by dark figures coming into my room. The earliest one I can remember is with my mother in the room and she's sitting on my bed, her face morphs into a demon-like thing. Many others. The worst thing is when you try to fight or call for help. Your voice doesn't work and your body will not respond. You just feel helpless. Ugh, I need to stop trying to remember these things. I'm getting chills. Number 8. I have experienced sleep paralysis literally hundreds of times. To me, it's usually a slick, black alien-type creature about 4 feet tall, although I have seen a Grim Reaper-type figure as well. I don't tend to get auditory hallucination, so keeping my eyes closed pretty well negates the entire experience, except for the actual feeling of paralysis. Does flicking your toes work for you? I usually have minor motor control of my toes, and am able to break myself out of the paralyzed state by flicking my toes together, which creates enough stimulation to break through the paralysis and wake me up. Number 9. I've had cycles of sleep paralysis for as long as I can remember and regularly see 2 different demons. The hallucinations are visual, auditory, and you can physically feel them at times. They have become more vivid as I've gotten older. One is a tall dark hooded figure that always stood at the bottom of my bed. My scariest experience with him was when I woke up one night with sleep paralysis and the big spooky hooded bastard was standing right next to me. His hood was covering his face, but I knew he was watching me and I knew he was evil. The second one I see is a smallish gremlin type creature that's got pointy features and is a browny green color, very similar to the one in the painting, but I had seen him before I had seen the painting or even knew what sleep paralysis was. He normally appears when I'm on my back and restricts my breathing and speaks in a weird whispery language. I woke up once and he was crouching in the corner of the ceiling. When I looked at him, he turned his head and looked right at me and smiled. I woke up on my side once and I could hear him behind me, speaking in his freaky language, and then I felt his snake-like tongue going in my ear and making a slithery noise. I can't tell how glad I am when I found out that there was a scientific explanation for it, and that I wasn't actually being haunted. I can't explain how so many people with sleep paralysis see similar demons, and how we all just know that the things we're seeing are evil, but it's something I choose not to think about too much for the sake of ever being able to sleep again. Make sure to share your personal story in the comments below and have the opportunity to be featured in a future video. Also, if you like these topics, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to continue seeing more content like this every day. See you next time.